Anytime. Hi. It's very cute.
Hi, we're gonna get started in just a minute or so. And then do seats available.
Classes. So
Smart.
what do we use these ones for?
So
I don't know. Do we use both?
yeah, you use both. So that was just for the live stream. That's for
Oh, we're using both.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So hi everybody, we're gonna get started. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Bex. I'm the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic. We're so excited to have Amy Shearn and Emily Schultz with us here tonight to celebrate Animal Instinct. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over. We'll be doing a hand-raised Q&A at the end of the night, so think of questions, swallow them tight, we'll get them answered. Afterwards, Amy will be signing and personalizing near where you checked in, so we'll let you know when and where to line up for that. If you're joining us virtually in the live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Animal Instinct using the link in the description. So the reason we're all here tonight, this lovely book, Animal Instinct, tells the story of Rachel Bloomstein, a mother of 3, recent divorcee, and Brooklynite stuck inside in 2020 despite her newly awakened lust for life. After attempts at online dating, Rachel turns to Frankie, an AI chatbot she programs with all the good parts of middle-aged dating along with some of the bad. She begins to realize that while she can reprogram this bot, she cannot do so with her family or friends or growing roster of paramours. Perhaps real life has more in store for Rachel than she could ever program for herself. Star of tonight's show, Amy Shearn, is the award-winning author of 4 novels, including Dear Edna Sloan, which we of course have here for you tonight to purchase.
Thank you.
We love Red Pen Press. Her writing and editing has appeared in a plethora of publications. She's an MFA from the University of Minnesota and lives in Brooklyn with her 2 children. Emily Schultz, our conversation partner extraordinaire, is the author of Sitting with Friends and the forthcoming Brooklyn Queer Kills Me, both from Thomas at Mercer. She is the former publisher of Joyland magazine. Her last novel, Little Threat, which we also have here for you tonight,
It's so good.
was named an Apple Books Best of 2020. She lives in Brooklyn, where she is a producer with the indie media company Heroic Collective. Without any further ado, please join me in the warmest welcome to Amy and Emily.
Thank you so much. What a great introduction. I just realized we're Amy and Emily. That's so Indigo Girls coded. So pleased. That's all. That's all I have to say. Thank you and good night. Yeah, thank you for being here. Should I read first?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm going to read a little bit from Animal Instinct. Oh, good. So I lost the place where I was going to read. Everyone just chill out for a minute. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little section that is about can you hear me? Do you think I'm doing this okay? Okay. It's Rachel's first date after divorce. Also, it's the pandemic. She's stressed out. Don't judge her. Okay. Rachel had warmed up with all the texting, gotten her bearings with the strings of chaste park dates. Remember those? This, plus all the restrictions of everyday pandemic life, plus the recent years of holding in, had burned through her reserves of patience, which was how, on a sultry evening in the middle of her life, Rachel found herself with a 30-year-old musician. That's young, for those of you who are younger than 30. Who was so good looking she almost hadn't matched with him. Who could trust someone with a facial structure like that? But who had, for some reason, agreed to meet her, had been unbearably flirtatious and flattering via text, and with whom she was now getting a drink. Or rather, having a picnic, as if they were a pair of small children in a fairy tale, meeting on a blanket beneath a tree, the sun bleeding out histrionically behind them. Rachel tried to think of something to say while she watched him open the bottle of wine, his dark hair falling over his eyes. The park where they'd arranged to meet was in Dumbo, the most dramatic part of Brooklyn, overlooking the water and the bridges and the shimmering spires of Manhattan, like she'd traveled directly from her apartment into a kind of romantic comedy, the kind that had a jazz soundtrack. She took a lift, double masked in the back seat, trying to breathe deep and stay calm. When was the last time she'd been excited about something? It was so much more fun than being anxious. It had been clear from their pre-date texting that sex was on the table tonight. But Rachel hadn't had sex with a new person since she and Josh had gotten together in college. In the interim, she'd gotten old, given birth 3 times, neglected to ever adapt to any fitness trends. Besides that, she was the result of too much sex education, had grown up thinking the second she had sex, she would get pregnant with a squirming bundle of AIDS. It's the 90s and things were not good. As far as she knew, the New York dating scene was a cesspool of syphilis, a hurricane of herpes. How much risk was too much risk? But there she was. And the musician, whom Lulu had nicknamed, Lulu's her best friend, had nicknamed the Rocker, was filling her plastic tumbler with a viscous Cabernet. Parks dotted the grass, a dutiful distance between each. There was a citywide 8 p.m. curfew, which they hadn't really discussed, even though it was 7 already. Helicopters whirred over the skyline, monitoring protests in Manhattan and who knew what else. Well, here's to the apocalypse, she said. The Rocker smiled. He had pointy canines like a vampire, which turned her inside out, and they clinked together their plastic cups. The conversation was B-plus level, but in the grand scheme of things, that was pretty good, above average. He was cute, with dark, well-defined features and wild hair, toned biceps covered in tattoos, like a caricature of how she might have described the men who had been her weakness, and she was willing to let the conversational flabbiness slide. At one point, she realized he'd been talking about Bitcoin for several minutes without ceasing, and she closed her eyes and sipped her drink and prayed he would close his mouth so that she could continue to find him attractive. To his credit, why did he get credit for this? But he did. When she gently interrupted and reminded him that she worked in tech and she understood how Bitcoin worked, he laughed and said, of course, and changed the subject. Something that helped her as a remedial level dater about doing all this during a pandemic was that once the bottle was empty and the curfew descended, there was nothing to do, nowhere to go, no restaurants, no bars, not even the park, except his apartment. Things were black and white, yes and no. And when this was the case, Rachel was trying to, for the first time in her life, choose yes, which was how she found herself in a strange man's loft in a converted industrial building she would later learn had once been called the Euphoria Factory, hanging her mask on a hook by the door. I'm going to kiss you now, the Rocker said, and Rachel nodded. Her whole body felt intensely alive, her skin thrilling to his touch in a way that made her wonder if she'd had senses before this. I'll stop there. Thanks.
I love that. And I love that section too. I'm so glad you read it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Amy and I have talked already, and I mean, I think that this is just an amazing book. It's hot and it's tender and it's full of so much just very bold feminism. When I started Amy's book, I was actually at the laundromat, and her descriptions of domestic hell were so vividly written that I was like, I'm going home and having a fight with my partner. And then I got home and I was like, maybe I should also text my girlfriend and have a fight with her. Sorry, Hannah. And then I was like, I'm overheating, and I just like pulled off all my clothes.
That is the correct way to read this book, actually. Thank you so much for respecting that.
Yeah, but I calmed down and managed to get farther into the book as well. But that's my first question really, is what kind of reactions have you had to the book? And are they what you expected?
Yeah, I have had, my favorite reaction is when people are like, I picked a fight with my partner because I was annoyed. I'm like, all right. Leah, not to put you on the spot, but there are seats if you want a seat. Don't look at Leah. You're going to make her uncomfortable. But if you want to. Okay, great. Okay, just saying. Just wanting to be uncomfortable. Yeah, I feel like my favorite reactions are when people are like, I had a fight with my partner. I broke up with someone. I also, just when people find there's a lot of sex scenes in this book, and when people are like, that was really hot. When you're working on a book, you read it 8,000 times. And so by this point, I'm like, I don't know even what's in this. So if people are finding it surprising or hot or thought provoking, that feels so exciting. And honestly, my favorite reactions I feel like are, like you just said, when people are like, this feels very feminist. This feels very, an early, very young reader was like, I think this is revolutionary because this woman is having a bunch of sex, but she's like not that hot. And I was like, yeah, that's the thing. It's for everyone.
Wait. How can you tell if someone's hot on the page?
I mean, I think she just talks about like being a little squishy, which like you can be squishy and hot, But she's like just a person, just like a mom.
Yeah. But I love that first scene also. You didn't go as far into it as I might have, because I love how kind of like, I don't want to say matter of fact you are about sex in the book, but it's like there's no self-consciousness to it. It's just like, we did this and this and this and this worked out and this didn't work out as well and I was surprised.
Yeah.
And so I love the way that you tap into the characters' emotions. And the other thing that I really love is even though there's a lot of dating culture in here and there's a lot of hookups, there's also so much, as I was saying, tenderness. Like, I don't want to give too many things away, but you have this scene where an app date that she's hooking up with is going down on her, and she looks down at his head and sees that he's balding slightly, and she feels like
she's like, oh,
yeah, exactly. She feels like not love, but like really sensitive to him, and like so little things like that I found myself just kind of, I don't know, like squeeing over.
Thank you. I mean, I really felt like it was important to me in writing the book that it felt like frank and like, let's be real about dating and about relationships and about sex and like, why are we so coy about things? And I feel like it's easier to know what you want and ask for what you want when you have language for it. So like, let's put the language in the book. And I was very lucky to have an editor who's here, but I won't embarrass her by making intense eye contact with her right now, who has worked with a lot of romance novels and was really like knows sex on the page so well. And I feel like that was a really helpful editorial process. When Kate would be like, so we're going to pull back a little bit here. We're going to, it's a little tricky to sort of like anyone who's tried to write a sex scene, which I know some of you have, to like find the balance between being, it's like we don't have a lot of language for sex and body parts in our culture that are like not porny and not just anatomical. And it's like, okay, what is the in between there? So that felt important to me to get to that. And also just to not have, hi, there's seats up here if you're comfortable. I mean, no one will turn and look at you as you're walking up. We're talking about sex. Welcome.
Something that we were actually talking about before this was how the pandemic actually brought out a lot of language around sex, because there was a lot of language about consent and whether or not you can touch somebody or be this close to them. And I wondered if you could talk about that in terms of like, what was this like? Because you were literally writing this book while the early pandemic was happening.
Yeah, and I feel like, remember early days of the pandemic, there was so much talk about consent, and I feel like a lot, my take on this might be very influenced from working in media at the time, and I don't know. There was a lot of talk about like kind of borrowing, or like, what can we learn from the language of consent that sort of was fomented in queer communities, like especially in early days of the AIDS pandemic, or like how, like, oh my God, all of a sudden everyone has to have these conversations. Like, what's your exposure been like? What are you comfortable with? Like, and I think that some of that, I hope some of that has stayed with us, and that I feel like we have a little bit more of a precedent for being like, are you a hugger? Are you comfortable with me touching you right now? Like, do you not want to be touched right now? that feels useful. I mean, it's something useful that came out of it. But yeah, I feel like there was so much kind of frank conversation, especially on the apps, especially if you were on like a certain kind of app and talking to a certain kind of people
Because
person.
I don't mind if you mind my revealing this. Like
Yeah.
you were starting to date again at that moment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like what was dating like in the early pandemic? I mean, there's a
Super
whole
chill.
novel, but
Yeah,
but
it's
from your
just
experience,
normal, very cool. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, I like Rachel. I got divorced, and then this pandemic started, and I was like, okay, like what are we doing here? And I felt like it was just such an interesting situation that I was like taking a lot of notes, like being like, there are people who are dating, and there are other people on the apps, and there are people with all levels of, like, as you all know, especially in New York, there are people who are in their apartments, never leaving, very, very conscious. There were the people who were flouting all sorts of restrictions and like having crazy parties. And I think especially for single people, it was like this moment of, okay, I'm not going to just be alone in my apartment, not touching anyone for the next year. Like, how long, we just didn't know how long things were going to go on. But also, like, how much risk is too much risk, which is a question she's always asking herself in this book. And I just felt like it was so interesting, that I knew there was something there I wanted to write about, but it wasn't a memoir. Like, I didn't have a story. There was no arc. It was just kind of an interesting situation, which is why, so I sort of mapped it to, I gave her a story. She's more of a storyline.
Yeah, and this is actually why I think it's very bold, is because I remember, the pandemic hit, and I remember taking walks, like distance walks with friends
So many walks.
who were other writers, and the thing writers had was we were used to working at home, really.
That's true.
But a lot of writers were saying, like, are you going to include the pandemic in what you're writing? Should I, in the story or this novel that I'm working on, should I leave it out? What kind of, am I writing it in the future? Like, who knows what's going to happen? So, I mean, what I love about the book is that you went all in. You were like, I'm going to document this time. And you did.
Well, thank you. I mean, I didn't want to. I kind of like took myself there kicking and screaming, because in early drafts of the book, there was no pandemic. I was like, this is a huge bummer. Don't want to write about this. I just want to write about someone dating after divorce. And I realized that it just didn't make sense without the pandemic. Like, this particular story, there was so much of her kind of motivation, and what makes things feel so like desperate and urgent and wild to her is this like fear of death everywhere. And this, especially in New York, I feel like there's this tang in the air of like, wow, things are really dire. We're all going to die. So she's sort of one of the people who's like, well, I guess smoke them while you got them, like, who knows? Nothing is promised. I might as well enjoy my life right now. And I just feel like a lot of her actions made more sense with that background.
Yeah.
And so it's there.
And I love also Rachel has kids. And there's so much wonderful stuff in the book where she goes from being like dating app Rachel to being like mother Rachel to being like ex-wife Rachel, and the sort of shifting between those modes, right? Which reminded me of during the pandemic, how like, to get any time alone to yourself was just absolutely golden. If you were in a family, it was almost impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's probably a relatable experience to anyone who's a parent in dating, pandemic or not. It's these weird kind of bifurcated selves, which now has at a certain point, it just made more sense to me. Actually, I was like, oh, that's easier. You're parenting, and then you turn off the parenting, and then you're dating. That makes more sense to me. But yeah, it was. I mean, I think even married parents have those different selves, that it's like, how do I integrate all of these different selves? And I think women in particular have historically had a hard time with like, how do I balance all these selves? How do I make time and space for all of these different selves that need to coexist, especially when it's all in a tiny apartment.
Yeah.
There's space.
How do you take a sexy selfie while your children are in the house or in the apartment?
Yeah, she figures it out.
She does.
I mean, she also, I will say, her kids go away to camp for almost the entire book, which I feel like is like a narrative device. I was like, let's get them away.
It's a little bit similar to YA books when they, kill off the parents.
Yeah,
So that
right. You can't
child
have
isn't
fun if
orphaned.
your parents exist, right? So yeah, no offense to kids, but she has to just send them away.
So one of the big concepts in the novel is this idea of the perfect person. And what you do in the book, it almost sort of starts as a joke for Rachel, where she's talking to her friend Lulu, and she's saying, what if I could just combine these traits from different people online and make one perfect person? And I wondered how you came up with that concept.
Well, Emily, I think it's funny, when you're sort of casually dating, I mean, I, like Rachel, kind of came out of marriage being like, that seems like a flawed system. Like, is there another way to do this? And I feel like I'm not the first person to find that when you're kind of casually dating, you're like, wait a minute, I can serve all of these needs with different people. That's great. Like, this person's really funny. This person's great in bed. This person has fun ideas for dates. And then earlier, a friend pointed out to me that, do you all remember this essay in The Cut from like maybe 2018 called the Dating Voltron or something like that? The Voltron of casual dating. A friend of mine was like, I think what you're doing is this. And this woman wrote this incredible essay about creating a Voltron, like from Transformers, I guess, of like the ideal person. It just happens to be constructed of like 5 different people that you're dating, which in a way makes sense. And in the book, she's like, this is great. I cracked it. And then a couple months in, is like, this is tiring. This is a lot of people. It's a lot to manage. And then she starts to kind of loosen her hold on that idea and think, okay, maybe she does have this dream of creating her perfect person with AI, which is like a good idea. There's no problems with it. And so she like takes pieces from all of these people and feeds them into this AI that she's training. And then also has a moment of like, I cracked it. This is a perfect chatbot. But then finds that too, I mean, no spoilers, but it's not in the end that satisfying because it's not actually a person.
And you actually worked in startup culture. You were an editor at Medium.
Yeah.
And how does that play
Weird.
into writing a female character who works in tech?
Yeah, I mean, I was decidedly not on the tech side. I was on editorial, but it was in the same office as people who are working in tech, who were like on the tech side, and it was a startup, and it's very funny if anyone has done either worked in editorial and then gone to a startup. It's like, wait, there's money. There's like so much money everywhere, and they're just like throwing things at you. They're like, would you like some cold brew on tap? Would you like a nap room? Would you like free all of these things? Which of course is like, there's also this culture of like, and we're a family and your whole life is here. And I feel like, for a little bit, I was like, cool. Yeah. It's a cult. Okay. But it's a well-paid cult, but I'm definitely going to get laid off soon. Cause like, media and startups, but yeah, so I was kind of looking at people who were, like thinking about AI, thinking about how to involve technology more in people's everyday lives. And, as like the writer type on the editorial side, I was like, I think this is a bad idea.
The cold brew sounds good though. I mean, I was
cold brew is amazing. And kombucha on tap. I was like, you can have my soul.
I was running Joyland at the beginning when things were just starting to get digital, and Joyland magazine was a literary online journal, still is, but I'm not involved. But Amy was an editor as well, and but we used to get invited places, and it felt like we were like the hippies at the disco because there would be all these tech people who were all about money, and they were very aggressive, and we'd be like, there's no money in fiction. Not what we do. We just run a website.
Right. Yeah. It is really funny to sort of have those two kind of cultures collide. and I think this has happened several times over, people who like are on the tech side or come from, I don't know, have mysterious sources of income as people do and are like, I know, publishing. I'm going to do this, and then are really surprised to learn that it just doesn't make any money. Like, I feel like there is, I mean, it's interesting that in this culture that we're in, which often is very dumb, like words and books and writing and smart writing still has cultural capital, and that people are still confused about what that translates to,
Yeah.
which is like cultural capital. That's it. Yeah.
There's some cultural capital.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to say, when I was reading this, I felt like you had written it just for me. And now that I'm in a room, I'm like, no, actually, you wrote it for everybody here. So I'm hoping everyone's going to buy it tonight.
Thank you. That's so nice.
But I wanted to know, like, when you were writing it, what was the most fun part to write?
What a fun question. I mean, I feel like her dating life and sex scenes were so much fun to write, because I was kind of challenging this. Like in my previous books, almost all of them, there's only kind of the like closed door, like they look at each other and then like, the wind blows like the curtain in the window and then it's like the next day, which is a very easy way to write a sex scene. But because I was kind of challenging myself to really go there and do it, it was really fun. And also fun because I wrote a lot of those scenes like, often like on my terrace with Carly being like, go, go, go. We get to stop writing in 40 minutes. And then you're going to read me what I wrote. And I'd be like, no, no one can read this. Which I think is actually a really fun way to write, and you're like, I'm going to write the thing that I kind of maybe don't want anyone to read, which ends up being the thing that like everyone wants to read, I think, because it's like raw and honest and personal.
I think so. I would have a hard time reading some of these scenes aloud to somebody else. Like,
do you want me to read them to you?
Just
absolutely look into your eyes.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, can you guys all turn around? It's private. Maybe later.
No, but actually, I mean, we should talk about sex after 40, dating after 40.
Yeah, we should.
Oh, okay, I'll go first. So,
everyone, get your stories ready.
Similar to you, I didn't undergo a divorce, but my partner and I opened the relationship during the pandemic. We had it open before, but we've been together a very long time. I think it's
ahead of the times.
22 years officially. And I had dated women early on and then a little bit in the middle of our relationship. And then when the pandemic came, I was kind of like, let's sit down and have a talk because I feel like it's done again.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want it to have passed out of my life. But like you and similar to your character, Rachel,
yeah.
I felt like, I'm doing this thing, I'm dating again, but the last time I did this, I was quite young.
Yeah.
And everything was different.
Right. Like there's so much collagen. Yeah. That's what you meant, right?
Well, no, I meant communication, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That too. Yeah. I mean, my character, like me, she met her husband in college and so like has not dated as an adult. And I think that's true of a lot of people. And then when I think also we're seeing so many now like memoirs and novels of this, women and men, but coming out of these long relationships in midlife and being like, it's like you're sort of unfrozen from the ice. Like, what news do you bring of this outside world? And yeah, like dating is really different than
it would have been when you were in college,
right?
Or in
yeah,
your mid-20s,
right? Which is like there was, I feel like, no language of consent. I don't think that was a thing. And there's a scene that like, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing when you crack yourself up writing. I feel like I had a professor in graduate school who's like, if you make yourself laugh when you're writing, that's bad. I was like, oh, what else is the point? But there's in the book that does make me laugh.
I think you have to have fun when you're writing.
There's so many terrible things about writing and publishing that it's like
it should be fun. Otherwise,
we need to amuse ourselves sometimes. Thank you. but there's a line where somebody asks if he can do something, and she's like, "What? In my day, people didn't ask," because she feels like an old crone from like another era. Like, how lovely! Sure, let's talk about it. And so I think, yeah, the sort of language of consent, and I think also I think of this as being like a now thing, but I think it's very much like a maybe here thing, not like here, maybe here, but I meant like New York City. But just so much more open-mindedness about labels and lack of labels and whatever degree of queer someone is, which like I feel like I live in a world where everyone's like somewhere on that spectrum. And yeah, and I think that that was like a little different, in the early 2000s.
Definitely. And I mean, I think it's different in the book too. Like, I love seeing presented that we have this bisexual character and there's no apologies anywhere. And she's dating men, she's dating women, and it's just what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple of reviewers have called it like a sort of late in life coming out and coming of age story, which is interesting because it's like she's never really not been out, but has been in like a straight passing relationship. And I feel like even more than that, it's like a coming of age story because it's so much about her sort of discovering her desires. And there's been so much writing about this recently. There was just that story in the New York Times Magazine about like Gen X women and how we're sort of this like weird little generation that has like no shame about sex. It's like, what? No, we're fine. Why? Like, what is that going on with everyone else?
Yeah, I don't think we do.
I know. Like, no, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
And then also I think like, as is like fairly well documented, I think, women like reach sort of like a peak of their sexual drive and sexual life when they're like in their 40s, maybe 50s, like, and
I'm glad you included those of us who are that old in our 50s.
Maybe 60s. I don't know what's gonna happen, guys. Tell me. Although I really love talking to like postmenopausal women who are like, I don't give a fuck about anything. I'm like, I'm so excited for that. When does this just like turn off and you're just like, fuck it, I'm gonna burn it all down. Excited for that.
Okay, I'm waiting for that.
I know. I think it has to do with estrogen. Like, it's scientific. That's all I have to say about that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that I hit 43 and I did hit that peak for sure. And that was the year. And it was like, oh, I cannot be tamed, right?
Yeah,
this is happening and it's happening
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think like something I've thought about a lot and is explored in the book is the idea that like, of course, in like the patriarchal culture that we live in, there's this energy of kind of not having any time or interest in like women who have like sexual lives beyond their childbearing years, which makes sense. Like in the patriarchy, in capitalism, it's like, why are you also, you're old and that's not what like according to the male gaze is like interesting anymore, which I think like it can be so liberating, to sort of just like be outside of that. Be like, okay, yeah, well, I'm sorry you don't like it.
I think you had written an essay, and you're going to have to correct me on this because I didn't revisit it before we got up here. But you had written an essay about kind of like having a frumpy dress. And when you're saying this is what it reminds me of, is how much you loved this dress that other people might have considered frumpy. Which, by the way, no frumpiness here. I love this dress.
I'm moving into my like friendly cult leader era.
I thought this was more like 70s divorce.
Yeah. They're connected.
Okay.
Oh my god, thank you for remembering that essay, which like it's on Medium so I can see the stats, and I think it's been read more than anything I've ever written in my life, which is funny. But yeah, it's about like a frumpy brown linen sack that's like a very like sister wives dress. That everyone hates, like that I love. And we were talking about this dress recently. Yeah. And everyone I've ever dated is like, are you okay? Like, I feel like it presents like I'm not self-confident or something. And I'm like, no, nothing feels better than wearing this dress that makes me look like I'm about to like go milk a goat or something. And it's like not flattering. It's really breathable. It's made with like sustainable linen or whatever. And like I feel like the whole point of it is that nobody thinks it's cute. It's not cute. That's not what it's for. And it's just, I don't know, nice, I guess, to live a life or to like remember that you live a life where like you don't always have to be cute for other people. Like sometimes you can just like be cosplaying, like wandering on the moors or something.
And wear it because you want to wear it.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't touch my body. It's amazing.
Speaking about, okay.
Do it, Emily. Do it.
All right. One more quick question, and then I think we're probably going to do a Q&A from the audience. So my last question is actually, what do you think about the idea of divorce novels?
Oh, what a good question. What do I think about the idea of them? Well, I do think it's really interesting that there's kind of so many in this moment, but then I can never tell if there really are so many in this moment or if it's just my exact age and milieu is people being like, hey, do you think marriage could be a bad idea? And is there like a world outside of this family structure? And I think, I mean, I'm not the first person to notice that, especially in the pandemic. I think it sort of like blew open a lot of things for a lot of people, kind of broke our suspension of disbelief. Many families and many women, I think, especially, were kind of looking around going, wait a minute. Like, I do everything.
Why am I doing the laundry at 6 at night?
Why do I do everything? And yeah, like it just became very bare, I think. And also how much, I mean, this has been, I think, pretty well documented, how women are often more a part of their community, like more connected to their friends, are sort of parenting, and especially in straight relationships, like sort of like wifing with the support of their friends. And then when that all got stripped away, I think for a lot of people it just was sort of like, wait, why are we doing this? Is this the best system? And yeah, I think it's interesting because, you know, I think when I was like divorce curious,
I
was
like that.
like
Divorce curious.
There are books even now that people recommend to me, and I'll be like, that's actually not for me anymore, but thank you so much. But like 6 years ago, I would have been like, can I read this, please? And I think,
And
yeah,
now your book is that. People are going to be like, can I read this, please?
yeah. I hope so.
For the divorce curious,
the
the
divorce
bi curious,
curious.
the all the way
Yeah,
curious.
Yeah. And I mean, you know how like publishing is such a slow process. Like by the time a book comes out, you're like, oh yeah, I'm not thinking about this anymore. I'm thinking about like other things. But yeah, I think there are so many kind of amazing divorce novels coming out right now, and I feel like it's good counter programming to the marriage plot, which we've been living with for so long. Like, why not? Let's introduce like a new, you know, plot structure for novels. Sure.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. We need some questions from the audience.
Guys.
Are you saving? Have you been saving them up?
Nicole Carr.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First, that essay is my favorite essay.
The frumpy dress essay.
I
Oh my god,
love
thank
that essay. I have a
you.
very frumpy sweater that is so hideous. And I'm going to text you. And every time I wear this hideous sweater, I think of your essay and it empowers me.
Empowering people to be frumpy.
Okay. So
I didn't tell you that.
Yeah.
But I have a question about process. So you were talking about your writing in the terrace with Carly, and so it seems like the situation and the circumstances during which you wrote this book was different from the circumstances during which you wrote other books. And if, like, you know, in terms of your schedule for writing and the access and time that you had to write, did that inform your process at all? And what were the changes or implications of that change in your process?
So for anyone who's watching at home, the question is about process and how the pandemic affected your process, time management, and just living through that.
Yeah. What a good question. Thank you. I think I always say, you know, my process has been so different for every book. And it really, I think, has to do with sort of the shape of my life at the time, which I think is true of every writer. And often we think it should be the other way, like, oh, I want to write, so I need to shape my life differently, which would be great, but I don't know who that's available for. Almost no one I know. So I think I've always been a really practical writer, sort of fitting in, okay, what does my life look like? Where's the time? How can I write this book? The book before this that I wrote was an epistolary novel. It's letters, and it was written literally on lunch breaks from a job that I had. And I feel like having like an hour at a time to write really shaped the book. It was like, okay, it's in these little hour-long pieces. And then this book, yeah, all of a sudden I had all of this time, which I know is like the opposite of people who were home with kids during the pandemic. We're like, I just want to poop alone. And I felt like I actually felt like the timing was so weirdly lucky. I mean, it was a nightmare, but then also kind of lucky.
You had all
to
this
start.
all this time because you had split. from your
Yeah, so
partner.
we're
So the
co-parenting
children were
50-50.
going back and forth.
Yeah, which I always recommend
And you
like
were
to anyone.
finally alone
Yeah,
for
yeah.
more than a few minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Like for the first time since they were born, you know? And I'm always like, even married people should have like a 50-50 co-parenting schedule. It's very humane. And yeah, just having like a every other weekend was just mine to do whatever I wanted with, which I had never had time like that ever. And so I just wrote, and I like became like an art monster and would like
So you
write for hours.
You sit down
hours.
and just bang it out, basically, for as long as you can.
I banged it out. That is how this novel got written. This novel was banged out.
Bravo.
Thank you. Yeah, which is like a crazy way to write, but it was fun.
Do we have another question? Yes.
Amy, I know you've written a lot of different novels, and I'm mostly asking this because I just finished my first real draft of my first novel.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot to do still, but like in your writing process or when you're editing, how much do you think about with your characters, especially your main characters? How much do you think about like, will people find them likable, or for you is it more like I want these characters to present multi-layered, complex, and that's more what you think about rather than like fretting about are readers going to like these people?
That's a good question.
So the question is about process, and the audience member has also just finished her book, and acknowledges Amy has many books, all very different from one another. So the question is, how do you keep writing these characters without worrying too much about whether or not they're going to be likable to the reader, and to make them multi-layered?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm always kind of trying to write a character that's interesting. And I feel this pressure more now in my writing life than like my first book. I was kind of like, no one's ever going to read this. It doesn't matter. I can just do whatever I want. And now I feel like I think much more about the reader and like what would be interesting, what would keep a reader turning pages. I try to think about, and anyone who's like worked with me as a student or client here has heard this like 1,000 times, but I feel like it's really helpful just in early stages to think about one reader, just like who is my one ideal reader? Is it me 10 years ago? Is it me in 10 years? Is it like my smartest friend? Is it that person I just had an interesting conversation with? Not an antagonistic person, like not your biggest critic, like they are dismissed from this part of the process, but like who is the ideal reader? And then just kind of writing towards like what would entertain them, what would be interesting to them, where will they like see themselves seen or understood. And then it's like later in the revision process I try to think more about more than one person. But I feel like what interests me when I'm reading is characters who are interesting. And even if they make decisions you don't understand, you find them interesting or they make sense for the character or they keep you reading because you're like, why did they do that thing? To me, that's so much more compelling than if a character is likable. Yeah, but I mean, I find them likable. Even the characters who are kind of like villains, not that I really have villains, but the kind of like bad guys in my book. I'm like, oh, they're trying, you know, just people. Yeah, good question though. Anyone else? Yeah, Nicole.
What part of the title came first? The
What-
AI or the
What part of the title came first, the AI or the animal instinct?
Well, Kate had this great idea. So my original title for this was Monster, and it was earlier drafts did have the AI that she creates is like a little bit more of like a monster. Um, and is like a little sinister, and sort of takes on more of an individual. I mean, no spoilers, but takes on more of like an individual consciousness and is just like a little threatening. And then I ended up feeling like, wait, no, I don't want this character to be punished for what she's trying to do. She's just trying to be a person. So I didn't want her to create something that's like punishing her. So it's sort of the monster parts of it got pulled way back. So then the title didn't make the most sense. And my brilliant editor had the thought of, what if it's two words that that have the initials AI. And I think, I mean, I don't know if you did. I definitely like put it in Chat GPT, which I was like, this feels ironic. Maybe AI will help me. Chat GPT had bad ideas. It was not that smart. And I think Kate used her actual brain, which was like a better idea because she's a professional. Yeah, and then I feel like there was a lot of talk about, should be animal instinct or animal instincts? Instinct. In the end, I think people just call it whatever they want to call it. But good title, right? Which is good. I think, yeah, Siobhan.
It was interesting to hear that you didn't think of it or didn't want it to be a pandemic novel at
Yeah.
first, because one of the things I think is so great about this book is that it is this like precise, like particulate observation of what it was like to live through the pandemic in New York City. Like, what people will like bury this book and dig it up in 200 years and be like, this is what it was like. So can you talk about like 5 years ago, right? Like we all kind of went into this place, and now your book is coming out, and it's this kind of weird anniversary. Like, how does it feel to you now rereading those parts of your book? And do you feel like it's familiar? Does it bring it all back? Are there things about it that surprised you or were just strange to observe?
So
Good question.
the question was, it was interesting to hear that you didn't necessarily want it to be a pandemic book, but now here we are and we're 5 years on. And so what is it bringing up for you as you look back on it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Siobhan, I feel like you helped me think about this in early drafts of this book, actually, because I remember talking to you about how we were really having a different pandemic than people in other parts of the country were. And especially, I think, for like, and this is definitely in the book, like for a certain, and maybe people here can relate, I feel like for a certain, obviously, some people are like immune compromised, living with immune compromised people had to be so careful all the time. And so much respect for them because it was a very hard time, of course. But for other people, I think it for a certain kind of person, especially a certain kind of like Park Slope Brooklynite vibe person, it was like became like a great opportunity to be very judgy and like to win and be like, I'm doing the best at pandemic. Like I am, which was really weird. And I think maybe very particular to this time and place. But then also it was like, I think it was maybe a little scarier in cities than in other places, because it was so present and we're so packed in. And you know, it was like you were hearing sirens and people were like seeing like, you know, refrigerator trucks. It was like such a gruesome time in New York City, that I felt like, okay, well, this is really a unique opportunity to just like be very precise. And I think, I mean, now it reads to me like historical fiction. Like it's all set in the summer of 2020. And so there are things that I have forgotten. Rereading that scene earlier, I was like, right, there was a curfew and helicopters all the time and just these weird little details. And I felt like there was something so unique too about that time before we could make it into a story, like we didn't know what was going to happen, and you didn't know if there was going to be a vaccine or when, or just it didn't have a shape yet. It was just like so that felt really interesting to note. And yeah,
I remember looking at your Instagram during the pandemic because you always had the best outdoor activities with your
oh, yeah,
children.
thank you.
And I would just be like, I'm stealing that idea. You know, you went to Cape Cod, and then
Yeah.
we went to Cape Cod.
Oh my God. You know what? Sometimes I feel like, we started hiking a lot, and
Exactly,
we still
hiking.
do that on the weekends. And like the weird thing about me and my kids is we love Staten Island. Like I know we're like the only people who actively love Staten Island and go there on purpose frequently, because we were like, I think, you know what? I got the idea from the Instagram of Natalka Buryan, who's an amazing novelist, owns the bar Elsa, where we just were. She like took her kids hiking in Staten Island, and I was like, huh, where's that? That's like a
That was
10-minute
a good
drive for me.
place, yeah.
I gotta go there. And which I feel like is sometimes why I would post things, because I'd be like, I'm getting ideas from other people. I think maybe like people should know that they're like beautiful landfill that is now covered with grasses and plants where you can go for a hike, and it's really close to Brooklyn. But yeah, it was like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So we went on a lot of hikes in Staten Island.
Okay, one more question. I know there was one out there. I saw somebody with their hand up before. Okay.
Kind of continuing on like the pandemic novel question, do you have any thoughts on sort of the meta narrative about the fact that most fiction, as discussed, has not really addressed the pandemic? And I don't know, like, do you think this is like going to be a big thing in remembering it?
Can you sum that one up? That was a good question.
Yeah. Thank you, Abraham. Good question. Well, are you asking like are we about to have a ton of pandemic novels, or like how do we deal with the pandemic in our writing?
Yeah, the second one.
Yeah, I think like how we deal with the pandemic in our writing is a question for every writer, because like you were saying, I feel like early in the pandemic, all the writers I knew were like, oh no, there can be a bunch of pandemic novels. Do we have to have pandemic in our novels? I feel like now it's like cell phones. Like if your characters don't have cell phones, it kind of calls attention to itself, and it's either like historical or in an alternate reality. And I've been really interested by how novelists are dealing with it. I just read Hot Air by Marcy Dramansky, which just came out on the same day my book came out. They're cousins, and it's great, and you should read it. And
also
it's
kind of a divorce novel.
Totally. And it's like a character who is further out from her divorce and on her first date in 7 years, and a hot air balloon crashes it. It's, you got to read it. But it's like it's set in, I feel like 2021, and it's like in the texture of the book, you know, the characters are all kind of have that energy. It's just mentioned like I think twice, but it's like the characters all have that energy of like, are we allowed to, should we be here? Should we not? Is that done? Is that not done? And I think it just like, I mean, I feel like just now maybe are we starting to really fully process it and how much it affected everything else that's happened since. And I guess this is a long way of saying, I feel like if the book is set in our current reality, like it has to have some mention maybe,
Some
because I feel like
reference, yeah.
everyone went through some shit and is like kind of just now coming out of it. But yeah, like how many pandemic novels do we want to read? I don't know. It's a tough question. Yeah. Oh, just this one, I think. That's good. That's all you need. She has a good time.
I agree. She does.
Any other questions? Great, we did it.
I think
we
that's
talked
it.
about everything.
I will just say that I'm wearing my park ranger uniform, and I'm gonna direct you all to the front of the store to get that novel.
Oh my
And
God, thank
here's
you,
Max.
Emily.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Amy and Emily, for joining us tonight. Thank you all for coming out and being here. My lovely coworkers are now pointing to where Amy is going to be signing in a moment. If you're still watching the live stream, you can buy a copy of the book in the link in the description. If it's still here, you can buy it at the front. You can also buy Dear Edna Sloan, and you can buy Emily's books as well. So if you want to just hold on 1 second, we're gonna get Amy back there as soon as possible. So I know you all want to congratulate her and say yay. But if you could just hold on until we're in that signing line, that'd be much appreciated because we're also gonna grab your chairs once you get out. So get your belongings. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank